A woman of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gates.
So if you're reading through the original Hebrew translation and arrangement of the Bible, and you're reading here in Proverbs, you read this book of great wisdom, Proverbs, and when you get to the very end of it, the very pinnacle, the epic conclusion of this wisdom literature, you read about the woman of noble character. At the end of this very important book of wisdom literature, the very end, the conclusion is about a woman of noble character. Now, the term for this, the phrase for this in Hebrew is the Eshet Chayil. And the word Chayil actually means strength. So this could also be translated the woman of strength. So how many strong women we have in the house? Throw it out, let me see. Don't half raise your hand, that means no. Put it up there, raise it, there we go. Strong women in the house. So you're reading and you hear, don't raise your hand, you're trying to make me laugh. Okay. So we get to this discussion of the strong woman, the woman of noble character. Then, in the original Hebrew translation and arrangement of the Bible, as soon as you turn the page, boom, it's the book of Ruth. And it will go on in the book of Ruth in chapter 3 to describe her using this very same phrase, an Eshet Chayil, a woman of noble character, or a strong woman. So what we see here is at the end of Proverbs, we're introduced to this principle of a noble woman, of a strong woman. But then we see the personification thereof in the book of Ruth. So the end of Proverbs brings up kind of this hypothetical, this conceptual, this is what a strong woman, a noble woman looks like. And then immediately following, we see what that looks like played out in the drama of everyday life. And that's what the book of Ruth is. It's a drama. It's a very human story, but we'll get to that here in a second. Now, some of you are thinking to yourselves, whoa, Matt, you're 2 minutes into the sermon and you already messed up. You fumbled the opening snap because the book of Ruth is not after the book of Proverbs. It says in my Bible right here, it's by Judges. So explain that one. I got this. This is fascinating. Now, every book between the Hebrew scriptures and what you hold in your hand today, the English Bible, all the books are the same. They're all based on the same original manuscripts. And in fact, anytime they make another translation of the Bible, they go right back to the original manuscripts. So the content is the same. However, the arrangement is a little different in the Hebrew Bible. So we have a chart up here. Let me show you this. Our Bibles are based on the Greek arrangement in the Bible. That's what we have. This is very linear. It's very historical and it's chronological. So it places the books as they happened. Genesis, then Exodus, then Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Historically arranged, all right? And it's concentric. The Hebrew arrangement, what you call the Tanakh, is arranged a little bit differently. It's arranged more rhetorically, more literarily. It has some more intention behind it. And a lot of times what they'll try to do in the Hebrew what you call the Hebrew canon, the original Hebrew translation and arrangement, is they'll try to take something at the end of one book and use that to transition into the beginning of another. Now, some scholars call this like connective tissue between the books. So let me show you this. So I told you Proverbs ends, the last chapter ends with a discussion of the Eshet Chayil, the woman of noble character, the strong woman. And then immediately after we jump, boom, right into the book of Ruth, where that will be acted out. We get to see what that looks like. Similarly, the book of Psalms, you see this journey the psalmist takes of orientation, disorientation, coming back up, coming back down, and finally getting to a point of praise and worship and awe and wonder of God. Well, immediately after Psalms, we see, boom, the book of Job, where Job will act this out. And Job will go through this very same journey, which we talked about last time I preached. So there's a lot of rhetorical and literary intentionality and how this is composed. Brilliant stuff. So in this, I would suggest, as we're starting this series off, this 4-week series on the book of Ruth, Proverbs 31 and this discussion of the Ishet Chayil, the woman of noble character, the strong woman, should be the lens through which we view the rest of the sermons. Someone take a picture of me like this, just looking like a goofball. All right, Instagram that. So we need to keep that in mind. That's going to be our lens that we read all of the story of Ruth through. Now, let me make a case for why we're going through the book of Ruth. Because some of you fellas might be like, it's a book about all girls. What is this, like a Nicholas Sparks novel? Like, dude, not interested. Can we go in Joshua when like they're killing people? Listen, there's something to glean for all of us here. For you women, this book will teach you how to be that woman of noble character, that strong woman, the woman God called and created you to be. For you men, now, especially if you're younger, if you're single, or maybe you are divorced and you're kind of back out there, this book will show you what kind of woman you want to be with. A strong woman, a noble woman, a God-fearing, God-honoring woman. But even more than just something for the ladies or something for the men, this teaches us something about God. And it teaches us about the character and the nature of God and how we are supposed to emulate that and act that out with one another. Now, what's additionally fascinating about the story is that God is seemingly not in the story. A lot of times in the Old Testament, you'll have this phrase in Hebrew, it's like, Vayomer Elohim, and God said, and God said, and God said. God doesn't say anything in the story. So it's almost like he's absent, which he's not though. And there's no divine miracles, there's no whirlwind, there's no fire from heaven, there's no angels. This is a very human story. And so if you're here today and you're kind of skeptical to the whole Christian thing, where you're like, oh yeah, parting the Red Sea, okay. I believe it, but I understand it if it's difficult. So maybe this is a good on-ramp for you. This is a very human story. But what's so brilliant is God doesn't have direct dialogue, but you see God weaving the story together. And in a couple weeks, there'll be these phrases dropped where they just so happened to be here at this specific time, where it's like, there's lots of coincidences in Ruth that aren't coincidence, they're providence. So bear that in mind. This is a very human story. Now, we have to set up where we are at in the story, where we're at in the history of Israel and in the Old Testament. I've done this a bunch of times, so I'm going to expedite this process because you guys know your stuff now. So the children of Israel were in Egypt. They were enslaved in Egypt. They cried out to God, and God heard their cry and delivered them from their slavery and captivity. And he told them, I'm preparing a promised land for you, and I'm going to take you there. So they leave Egypt, God's chosen people, and they go through the wilderness. Apparently they're tiptoeing, trying to sneak up on someone. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so they're in the wilderness. And in this time, God gives them the commandments. If you read the book of Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, he tells them how to live in this world and who they are called to be. Because remember, we'll talk about this later, these people were slaves. They weren't allowed to think for themselves. They weren't allowed to act for themselves. They didn't really have like a law or moral code. They just had to work. So God, in his grace and kindness, teaches them how to live. I call it training wheels. A lot of times he puts training wheels on them and says, this is how you're supposed to live. This is how you're supposed to act. What's more, in this wilderness time, God reveals not only who they are as a people and who they're called to be, but he describes and he tells them who he is and what he's like. So he describes who they are and who he is in relation to them and what they are supposed to do because of that. So that's the wilderness wandering. Well, then they eventually make it into the promised land. And this is where you get to the book of Joshua, and there's conquests, and it's like a war novel. And then they're finally firmly established in the promised land. And then that brings us to the book of Judges, which is where our story is going to be set today. Now, the book of Judges was not a super fun, happy time in Israel's history. In fact, a lot of scholars and theologians refer to this as the vicious cycle of Judges. And this is kind of how it's described. It says a lot of times in Judges, there's these kind of three phrases. It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And then usually at the end of some kind of story where Israel messed up really bad, it said, and Israel did great evil in the eyes of the Lord. So this was the temperature, this was the climate of this time in redemptive history. There was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And whenever they did something, it usually said, Israel did great evil in the eyes of the Lord. So that's where our story finds us. In fact, that's how Ruth starts out. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. Now, the vicious cycle that I alluded to, because of this constant disobedience, this cycle, this pattern kind of forms, where Israel would be at rest in the land, and then they would turn away from God and do stuff they're not supposed to. And then God would punish them, and usually in the form of some kind of foreign oppressor, and then they would get to a really low point and be under oppression. And they'd be like, God, help us out, please save us. And God would save them and bring them back to a point of rest. And then they would turn away from God and do what they're not supposed to. And then God would send punishment, and they would get conquered. And then in their lowest moment, they would cry out to God, and then God would deliver them again and bring them back to a place of rest. And this happened again and again and again and again. And now apparently I've turned it into a dance. Okay, I'm preaching. All right, so that's the climate of the story. Now, in this time, during the days of the judges, in the story of Ruth, it says that there was a great famine in the land. Now, we've talked about this before. A famine is not like, oh man, I'm kind of hungry. We don't have as much food as I usually like. No, bro. Like, a famine was serious business back then. No food in the land. And it would get so bad sometimes that people would have to resort to eating each other. So I would say, no, I know. It's disgusting. So that's what's going on now. There's a great famine in the land. Then the text introduces our characters. So I'm going to introduce our characters to you. I have some people that are going to kind of play the parts. So first of all, like any good traditional Hebrew Jewish story, we're introduced, first of all, to the patriarch, the main character. His name is Elimelech. So everyone say, hey, Elimelech, give it up for Elimelech. Woo! Now, in this story, names are going to be very significant. This is a Hebrew tactic and tool. Oh, nice job. Jump it next time. Jump. So, sorry, you're going to be here, scoot a little bit this way, then turn this way, then again, one more, and then turn it this way, and then right there. Okay. Now, this is the patriarch, Elimelech. Elimelech's name means, my God is king. Names are going to be significant. My God is king. This seems like a pious man who recognizes God as his king. Because in the land of Israel in these days, was there a king? No. So he's recognizing, he's like, listen, I don't need the judges. Those guys are acting up. God is my king. So he seems to be painted as a protagonist, as a good character. Now, this is my parents last Sunday here. They're moving back to the Midwest. So I asked, this is actually my dad. He's the actual patriarch of our family, or so he thinks. Okay, so this is Elimelech. And Elimelech has not one, but two sons. Now again, this is a very traditional Jewish way to tell a story. A patriarch with two sons. So I'm going to introduce the sons to you. First of all, we have Machlon. So Machlon, come on up here. Here we go. All right, give it up for Machlon. Everyone say, hey, Machlon. Woo! Give him pageant wave, pageant wave, pageant wave. All right, very good. Now, again, names are terribly significant in this story. And Machlon's name means sick or sickly or ill or weak or dying. So not a pretty name like Rose. Okay, so that's, yeah. So that's who he is. Now, this is going to be a bit foreboding, a bit fortuitous of what's going to transpire later in the story. So, second brother is introduced, Kilion. Come on up here, Kilion. Give it up for Kilion. And again, names are significant. And Kilion's name means finishing or ending. So again, Kilion does not have a pretty name, and his name is a bit foreboding of what will happen later in the story. So, pretty traditional Hebrew story here. Patriarch father, two sons. But then we are introduced to the lady of the story, the elder stateswoman of the story, Naomi. So come on up, Naomi. Come on, give it up for Naomi. Say, hey, Naomi. Now, actually, in honor of Mother's Day, I've asked my mom to play this role. to honor her, and also because I can make jokes about her being old and get away with it. Okay, and now Naomi, again, names are significant. Naomi, the name means pleasant. So obviously I did not typecast her here. I just finished Naomi, and it means pleasant. Now, please remember that. Her name means pleasant. It's going to factor in. So, what is going on in the land at this time? What's going on? What's bad that's happening right now? A famine. Good job. Let me hear a little louder. What's going on? All right, good. Let's get it going. Okay, so it's a famine in the land. Now, there's two explanations for this. There's kind of some conjecture on why this is happening. Some people think that there's a famine in the land because Deuteronomy 11, back in the wilderness wandering, God says, listen, when you're in the land, if you do what is right and you do what is good, the land will be fruitful and it will produce for you. However, if you turn away from me and you do wrong things, the land will become barren and empty. So some scholars say, well, there's a famine in the land because Israel is not being faithful. Remember the vicious cycle of Judges and everyone doing what was evil in the eyes of the Lord? So some attribute it to that. Some just say, them's the breaks. Like, that's why there's a famine. Like, it's just hard times. Sometimes bad things happen. So there's different explanations to this. Now, again, names are very important and very significant. Where this whole family lives is very ironic. This family lives in the land, and in Judah specifically, and within Judah they live in a town called Bethlehem, which you probably heard from the Christmas story. Now Bethlehem in Hebrew, it's Bayit Lechem, which means house of bread or house of food. Now, if there's a famine in the land, this name is kind of ironic, because if it's the house of food, except that it has no food in it. So we hear that, we don't pick up on the irony. The original inspired author was probably like, this is hilarious, there's no food. But it's not really funny to us. But still, there's an undercurrent of irony here. So in the days of a famine, they live in the house of bread, except that there's no bread. So here's what Elimelech's gonna do. He's gonna take his family out of the land, and he's going to move eastward to the land of Moab. All right, so you guys start heading that way. You're gonna go down this aisle. You're gonna go down this aisle. You two will walk down the middle aisle, just like when you guys got married like 300-400 years ago, all right? Okay, now, as they're doing this, again, there's some scholarly conjecture here on whether this is a good or bad thing. Some say that Elimelech is actually doing an evil thing here. He's doing a bad thing. Because again, back when God gave the law, you remember I talked about Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers? God told the children of Israel, you're to dwell in the land, to be fruitful and multiply in the land, to dwell in the land. Stay in the land. And he didn't want them roaming off to different lands, because back in these days, each land, each tribe, each nation had their own localized deity. And so in Moab, they had this deity, and his name was Chemesh. And so perhaps if they moved there, they would be susceptible to worship Chemesh. So a lot of people say, Elimelech did a bad thing by taking his family out of the land. Again, others say, and I'll let you decide, they say, that dude was just watching out for his family because the famine was so bad that like people could maybe start eating each other. Either way, they leave. And they head eastward, okay? Now here's something you need to realize about this. Moab is located east of where they were living. And in the Old Testament, this is consistently true. Anytime you moved eastward, it's a bad thing. Like moving east of Eden in Genesis. When Israel's in the land, they always have to move east into exile. Moving east is very bad. So as we're reading this, if we have that, finely tuned Hebrew eyes to read this, we'd say, ooh, they're going east. This is not a good thing. But it is what it is, which I've never understood that phrase. Of course it is. Anyway, all right, so, and the first thing that happens, people, we are in verse 3 of the story, the very beginning. The first thing that happens, the main character, Elimelech, dies. By a double punch. No, I don't know why. But he dies. You out, you dead. Okay. This is shocking to us because in the Hebrew narrative, that's the main character. They literally killed off the main character in like the first scene. Here's an analogy for you. It'd be like a new Batman movie, okay? Beginning of the movie, there's like a bank robbery or a heist. Batman drops in. I'm Batman. And all of a sudden the guy goes, and shoots him, and he goes, oh. And then you've got another 2 hours of like, Alfred? Like, what? Like, why are you killing off the main character early? So this is shocking. However, this is still pretty consistent with a good Hebrew narrative, because now you have two sons. And now it's turned into a story of two sons, much like Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Isaac and Ishmael. I could go on forever. So still pretty strong, pretty traditional Hebrew story. Now at this point, these are the only remaining heirs to the inheritance of Elimelech. So these two are the only thing keeping the family line going, because Naomi is a widow. And so they're gonna need to produce some grandchildren for her. So they get married and they take wives. So Machlon, he marries this woman named Ruth. So everyone give it up for Ruth. Say, hey Ruth, good job singing earlier, good job. And then Kilion takes a wife, and her name is Orpah. Not Oprah, Orpah. Everyone gets that mixed up. Everyone gets that mixed up. Orpah. So they take Moabite wives. Now, again, there's conjecture about whether this is positive or negative. And many argue that this is a negative thing. Back in Deuteronomy 7, again, in this wilderness wandering, when the Israelites are given the law, they are warned not to take foreign wives. And these women are from where? Moab, which is not in Israel. So they just took foreign wives, which is construed as a bad thing. Now, quick break here. This teaching in Deuteronomy 7 has often been used to argue against, let's keep it 100, interracial marriages. It's been used to preach that. Or it's been used to preach not marrying someone from a different country. With all due respect, I'm not sure that's an appropriate rendering. I think you have to contextualize better than that. These people, the Israelites, were slaves in Egypt. They had no kind of concept of morality. They were very impressionable, and they're taken out and they're like, well, we don't know how to live. They're very impressionable. And so the Lord in his providence knew this, and he knew that if he just let them go marry other women from different countries, that they would adopt their customs and start worshiping their gods. Makes sense, right? They don't know what to do, so they're like, oh, who do we worship? Kemesh? Okay, yeah, yay, Kemesh, we love you. So God, in their infancy as a nation, was trying to protect them, saying, okay, don't take foreign wives, because they're gonna lead you away. So we had to talk about that, but they took these foreign wives. But here's one of the things I love about the story of Ruth. God takes this thing that seems like a bad thing, and he's gonna make good from it. This bad action, this conceived wrong action, God is gonna make good from it. And he is going to redeem the whole story. And redemption is one of the keys to the story of Ruth. It's one of the major themes. So he's gonna take something that was bad, and he's gonna make good from it. And what's more, we are going to have, spoiler alert, we are going to have an unlikely hero, which, as the name of the series is Book of Ruth. Well, guess who it is? It's Ruth. Ruth is going to become an unlikely hero. And she is actually going to act more godly than anybody else in the story, save one other person that will be introduced later. So this Moabite woman acts more godly than anyone else in the story. And it's very interesting because the text goes out of its way to remind you that she's a Moabite woman. Almost every time Ruth is mentioned, it says Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite. It never just says Ruth, Ruth the Moabite. It wants to remind you that God is using a Moabite woman to show his characteristics and show his love. Additionally, what I like about the story is in theology, there's this conception of progressive revelation, where God starts, again, kind of with the training wheels or kind of protecting this nation in infancy, and the vision of the kingdom of God begins to expand from there. And more people are included, and more people are included, and more people are included. We get to the New Testament, Jesus says, go out into all the nations, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The book of Revelation, it says every tribe, tongue, and nation will worship the Lamb. So we see this expanding vision of the kingdom early on here in Ruth, and that's something I love about the story. So we have this unlikely character. And these two dudes take these wives. Naomi's still a widow. She's still super old. And then they live in the land for 10 years. Now, we kind of gloss over that and like, okay, they lived for 10 years. They don't have any children. The Old Testament always goes out of the way to say, who begat who? You know, you get those long passages like, who begat, who begat, who begat, who begat. They wasn't begetting anyone, okay? So, change that verb around. They had no kids. Now, some of us might just think, oh, that's unfortunate. In this culture, in this society, that was borderline disgraceful, and people would probably step back and be like, maybe they're like cursed or something. Or maybe God's cursing this marriage because these are Moabite women. This is a very bad thing. And so it seems like, just like the land was barren at the time, these two women are barren. And if they can't have kids, who's gonna carry on the family name and the family line? I mean, who are the only two characters in the story that can carry on the family name? Those sons. Well, check this out. After 10 years in the land, no kids, no nothing, eventually, Machlon, whose name means sickly and dying, he dies. Apparently by karate chop. And I don't think that's how it actually happened. Those scholars argue. Okay, so Machlon dies. Ruth is left a widow. And then Kilion, I'm coming for you. Kilion, again, 10 years, don't try to get away from me. The icy cold hand of death. Or Kilion, whose name means ending or finishing, icy cold hand of death touches him. He did. You're out. So he dies too. So are you following me? He's a ghost. He's a ghost. Okay. So then the women must come together, and now we have a story about 3 widows, and they have all lost their husbands. Question: who is around now to carry on the family name and to ensure the inheritance? Naomi can't. So here's the thing. In today's day and age, 3 recently single women, even if they're widows, this could be like the premise of like a rom-com. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're gonna get back out there, we're gonna date a bunch of guys, we're gonna go out for coffee and shoe shopping, and they'll have some kind of montage scene where they're in the kitchen and they're like throwing powder at each other. This could be like a fun story, right? That probably is a movie. I just never watched rom-coms. That might be out there. I don't know. So to us, we're like, okay, cool. Stella can go get her groove back. This is going to be great. Not in this culture and society. Women were highly vulnerable in this society. They had no one to protect them. They couldn't claim any kind of inheritance. And quite frankly, women were viewed kind of as possessions. And even later on in the story, in chapters 2 and 3 especially, other men who we'll get to later who try to protect and watch out for these women, they have to keep telling dudes, don't touch them, don't rebuke them, keep your hands off of them, do not approach them, don't touch them. Because apparently back in this society, it was much more kind of a gropey, grabby society. Women were completely unprotected. So this is a dire state, and it says that these women weep together. But then, Naomi hears that there's food in the land again. So no longer is the promised land barren, it has food. So she is gonna go back to the promised land. So go for it, Naomi. She starts walking back. But then all of a sudden, she hears something over her shoulder. What? Oh, very good, that was a good sell. What? Okay, good acting. And these two start following her. Ruth and Orpah begin to follow her. Okay, like a dog following you to school. So then, Naomi says, no. She says, and there's a command here in Hebrew. She says, return to your home country. Go back to your mom and dad's house. Go back to your mom and dad's house. You have no affiliation with me. And then, now she's doing this to protect them because she knows the dire situation, which we'll get to. Then Naomi speaks a blessing over them. And she says, may the Lord demonstrate kindness, the same kindness that you showed me and that you showed my dead sons. So may the Lord demonstrate the same kind of kindness that you have shown me and that you have shown my dead sons. So she speaks a blessing over them. Now, something we have to look at here. The word that Naomi uses here for kindness is a very important word in Hebrew. And it's this word chesed. And I've preached on this before, but in the wilderness wandering, I told you, God told the children of Israel who they are and who he is and the relation they're in. When God says who he is, he says that I am slow to anger and rich in love and kindness. The word for loving kindness here is chesed. And I've preached on this before. This is central to who God is. God is loving and kind, chesed. And so this is the exact same word that Naomi uses here. And he says, may the chesed, the loving kindness of God, may he show you that kindness just as you showed it to me and my dead sons. And she speaks blessing over them, and then she just says, just go find rest in the house of a husband in Moab. Because honestly, they don't really have a tie to her anymore. They technically, officially don't have any kind of tie to her. So she tells them to return. But they refuse to leave. So Naomi starts walking again. Here she goes, just walking it out, walking around. And then what? She hears something over her shoulder. Let's do it again. And they're still following her. So then she gets a little bit more adamant, and she uses this word, this command verb, lake, and she says, go, get out of here. And then she begins, go, get out of here. She says, you're killing me. All right. She says, get out of here because, she lays out her case. She's going to make her case seem as desperate as it actually is. She's going to paint the picture of how dire the situation is. She goes, what do you guys want me to do? You want me to go find a husband tonight, get pregnant, have a baby, and then you can marry my baby? You can't marry my baby. That's weird. I mean, those would be very strange engagement photos. Is it an engagement photo or a maternity shoot? What are we doing? It'd be weird. And she says, by the time my baby is grown enough to marry you, you're going to be an old lady like me, all right? Super old. All right, so she makes the situation dire. Now, we have to point this out. What is she talking about? Why do they have to marry her baby? I have to introduce you to a concept known as levirate marriage. So say, levirate marriage. Say, levirate marriage. Now, I'm going to go over here to explain this to you guys. So we had Elimelech, okay? This is the patriarch, the father. Okay, so he would have two sons. If one son is married and dies, the other brother would take that brother's widow as his own wife, as a way of protecting her. And in fact, the term used is redeeming. He would redeem her. And this is a way to protect the woman in the inheritance, because if Elimelech dies, then the two sons will take the inheritance. Well, then if the other son dies, this woman has no share in the inheritance. So the other brother would take on this woman and redeem her so that she could be part of the inheritance. Now, to play this out in a little more human, relevant, current terms, here we go. So my dad's last name is Johnston, okay? So he has an estate. He has property, an inheritance. I have two brothers. I'm the third. Whoa. All right, I just made a brother up, apparently. So let's just say, here's my dad. And I'm, for the purposes of the sermon, use your imagination, pretend I'm married. Okay, some people laughed in the first service, so thank you. Okay, I'm married. And let's just say my next oldest brother, his name is Alex. And let's say he's married, all right? So Alex has his bride, I have my bride. Well, say my dad dies. Okay, we're gonna split the inheritance. Well then, let's just say that I died. I choked on a chicken bone and I died, okay? Well then my brother Alex would have to come and redeem my widow and try to live up to the high bar and standard that I set, which you're probably not gonna be able to do that. Sorry, Alex. So that's how levirate marriage worked. And this husband would redeem this widow so that she could stay protected and that she would still have a share in the inheritance. So that's why Naomi's talking about having another kid, because she's like, there is no other brother who can marry you. There is no other brother. I mean, I could go make another brother, but he's gonna be a baby. So then, she paints a very dire picture here. She says, I am too old for this. And she literally says that this is a hopeless situation. This is hopeless. And she says, and keep this in mind, she says, I am bitter. She says, believe me, this whole situation is more bitter, remember that, for me than it even is for you guys. So just go home. Now, has anyone here ever seen the movie White Fang? Anyone who read the book White Fang? How about Harry and the Hendersons? Okay, no, more hands go up on that one. That's hilarious. There's a scene in the movie where in order to protect the wolf or protect Harry, he's like, get out of here, go, get out of here. They love Harry or they love the wolf, but they want the best for the wolf, so they have to scoot him. So Naomi says, just go, just get out of here. And so Orpah does. She kisses Naomi and leaves. Don't do it, that'd be weird. Don't be kissing my mama, that's weird. Okay, so then there's two. So Naomi goes to leave again. Let's go. She hears footsteps behind her. And then, what? She turns around again. And Ruth is still there. And so Naomi says, go, go back with Orpah. Go back to your people, and pay attention to this, and go back to your God. And then Ruth, strong here. Again, strong woman. She says, please do not entreat me. Please do not ask me to go. And then Ruth is going to make a very strong vow. She says, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and pay attention to it, your God will be my God. Whoa. And then she says, where you die, I will die. And then to seal this vow, she says, may the Lord deal with me even ever so severely if even death separates us. Wow, that's some commitment. I mean, a lot of you can't even commit to like lunch plans with your mother-in-law. You know what I'm saying? So, so then she decides she's just going to stick with her. And it says here that Ruth, instead of leaving like Orpah, it says that Ruth, and we have it up on the screen, clings to Naomi. Now, this word in Hebrew, clings, is very important. It's this word devak, or it's from this root word devak. And again, if we have this trained eye in Hebrew, you would know that devak is used back in Genesis 2 when it's describing Adam and Eve. And it says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and will cling or devak to his wife. So there's this like intense devotion here. There's this fierce loyalty here. And so Ruth is devak. She's clinging to Naomi. So Naomi kind of gives in. And it says, Naomi sees, and we have the verse on the screen, Naomi sees that Ruth is determined. Now the word determined here, it's amatz in Hebrew, and it actually means courageous. Ruth is courageous and sticking with and clinging to Naomi. So the two decide to return to the land together. All right? You guys gonna go around? Do you need me to help you up? We'll get one of those chairs installed by the stairs, for old ladies that you can just go up. I'll get you one of those. All right. So, so they return to the land. And as soon as they get there, there's all this whispers. And it says it causes a stir in the city, and everyone starts going, is that Naomi? Is that Naomi? Is that Naomi? Is that Naomi? And Naomi says, do not call me that name any longer. She says, instead, call me Marah. And Marah means bitter. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the story. What does Naomi's name mean? Pleasant. Don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me Marah. Call me bitter. And she says, because I left this land full and I have returned empty. And so this emptiness and barrenness is key in the story. The land is empty and barren. And then the wives are empty and barren. And because of all the loss, now Naomi is empty and barren. And this is her lowest moment. And she says, the Lord has afflicted me and caused me great misfortune. And then chapter 1 ends with a little teaser, a little to be continued. And it says that all this happened around the time of the barley harvest, which we're like, what? That's going to be our teaser, because the next two chapters in the beginning of the third, the whole setting, the whole context for redemption is during the barley harvest. So there's a little teaser here at the end that says, this all happened at the time of the barley harvest, because that's when redemption is going to happen. Let's give it up for the actors. Here we go. Well done. So some of you perhaps resonates with Naomi's story. Maybe you feel like you should change your name to Marah. Maybe you feel bitter. Maybe you feel afflicted by the Lord. And you're like, God, I just can't get a break. And maybe you feel empty. And even though we went through that whole Road to Restoration series, maybe you're still holding on to bitterness, or you just feel like, I lost everything. And we see in the book of Ruth that oftentimes in these moments, His providence and His kindness, and in His looking out for us, God will place people into our lives. Again, in the book of Ruth, there's no angels or fire from heaven or waters parting. God sends people into our lives. And I call this the providence of people. God in His kindness and His providence will put people in our lives to devak, to cling to us in our time of need. And I would suggest that when this happens, This is a beautiful picture of how God loves us. And there's this word, and when we cling to one another, it kind of alludes and connotes to this word we talked about earlier, this chesed, this loving kindness. And when we cling to one another, we are demonstrating that love of God, that chesed of God, and that kindness. 1 John 4:11 through 12 says, "Dear friends, since God has loved us, we ought to love one another. No one has seen God, but if we love one another, God lives within us, and God's love is made complete in us." What? Like, that's kind of weird. A lot of times we talk about love conceptually, especially when it comes to God's love. It's like he kind of puts it on us sometimes, and he says, no. If you love one another, God lives in you. You are acting godly towards each other, and God's love is made complete in you. As a pastor, I am very blessed to see this acted out. Just like we see things acted out in the story of Ruth, I am blessed to see this acted out daily. Sometimes I make hospital visits, and recently I actually went to go see Robert and Becky Barron. And when I walk in the room, Robert's laid up in the bed, and Becky's chair is pushed directly against the bed, like flushed up next to the bed. And I'll see her kind of rub his back or hold his hand. And when I see that, it seems to me that if she could have it her way, Becky would just be right there in the bed with him, suffering with him there. And that is davak. That is clinging to one another, and demonstrating God's chesed, his kindness. There's a gentleman here whose wife is battling cancer. And I check in with him regularly, and I always ask, how's it going? How are you two doing? How are you two doing? And when he responds to me, he doesn't say words like I and me. He doesn't say she and her. He says, we are making it. And he uses words like we and us. And as I talk to him, it's almost like they both have cancer. They're both in it together. That is davak, clinging to one another. And there's something beautiful about that. Something that shows us God's love and kindness, his chesed. There's another gentleman here. He was in first service, so I just pointed him out. But I was talking to him the other day, and he was telling me that he's having some health issues. He's having some health problems, and honestly, he's kind of hurting. But his wife is also battling cancer. And so as he was telling me these things that are wrong with him, he goes, no, I'll be all right. We have to get her well first. He's like, I'll be fine. We're going to take care of her first. And I watch that brother walk his wife in every single day holding her hand. He walks her down this aisle and sits her in the chair and sits next to her. That's davak. That is clinging to one another and demonstrating God's loving kindness as we do that. And since it's Mother's Day, even though I made a bunch of old lady jokes about my mom, I'll honor you with this story. When I was in, I believe it was 5th and 6th grade, it was that close together, I watched my mom take care of both my grandparents as they were dying of cancer. They pretty close back to back. And in my family, we have this culture that if someone's sick, we just move them into the house, and we have hospice care, and we just kind of care for them ourselves. And so I got to watch my mom do that, and she did everything for them. She would help them clean themselves, help them go to the bathroom, help shower them. She would do my grandma's makeup for her and her hair so she would feel dignified. She would play the music for her that she knew she liked. She would wait up in the middle of the night and just have her hand ready, so if my grandma needed to hold her hand to know she was there, she was there. And there's something, seeing that, even as a young man, something about that. I just knew there was something holy about that. There's something right about that. And I think when we hear these stories, from the most pious Christian to the most cynical agnostic, I think there's something where we all just go, yeah, like there's something to that. Yeah, there's something to that. Yeah, it's because God is love and he calls us to love. And he calls us to davak and cling to one another in kindness, just as he does with us. I give shout outs to my boy Keith. Keith does a great job, our lead pastor here, Keith does a great job of that. If anyone's sick in the hospital, he knows about it and he rushes off. I told first service, sometimes we'll be moving something heavy and Keith gets a call that someone's sick and he just leaves. I'm like, Keith, I'm carrying it by myself. And he just right out the door. because that is how you demonstrate God's love to others. You devach and you cling to them. And it is especially potent and powerful when you do it for the least of these. Scripture is consistent, especially in the Old Testament, of caring for the orphan, the foreigner, the immigrant, the fatherless, the widowed, the sick. And Jesus says in the New Testament, he says, whatever you do for the least of me, you do for me. And so I saw this video on Facebook of this dad who was raising an autistic son. And I always have mad respect for anyone who does that, because I know that's probably not easy. That is perhaps a bitter situation. And his son's favorite band is Coldplay. And so this father decided to take his son, who struggles with autism, to a Coldplay concert. And I want you guys to just watch this. And I just think this is compelling and powerful and exactly what we're talking about here today. I think there's something holy about that. There's something right about that. And when that dad is sitting there embracing his son, I think that's how God embraces us. And in turn, I think that is how we are supposed to embrace one another. I love the words to that song. Early on in the verse to that song by Coldplay, it says, the tears are streaming down your face when you've lost something you can't replace. You love someone, but it's gone to waste. Can it get worse? And it says, lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, but I will try to fix you. And I see that here in the story of Ruth. As Naomi has lost so much, and she's bitter, and she's empty, and she's afflicted, and Naomi walks that road home with her. And I think that is exactly what we are supposed to do with one another. And I think that Ruth teaches us to have the courage to cling to one another in kindness. So as you leave here today, Hope Church, may you have this kind of courage to cling to one another in kindness. May we here at Hope Church love each other as God has first loved us. And as we sing this last song and sing about who God is and his characteristics and his nature, may we hold high and holy the God who in his great love moves towards the fatherless and the orphaned and the widowed and the sick and the helpless. And may we be so filled with God's love that we can't do anything else but take it outward. And if you're here today and you are in that place of bitterness and affliction and emptiness, may you know that God is not absent. That even though sometimes it seems like that, God is still above the story and within the story, and that he is working all things out for good. So as you stand and sing with us, may you keep that in mind. And may we love one another as God has first loved us. Grace and peace to you, Hope Church.